everybody. This is Southport StoryTeller. It's May, so this is our Mother's Day edition of Southport StoryTeller. So I don't know about you, but every time I hear Mike tell his stories of when he was a little kid, I just keep thinking about his mother. And I just think, man,
she had her hands full.
he put him through a lot. So I thought, since it's Mother's Day this month, that it would be fun to talk about his mother a little bit. So Mike agreed to talk about Marie Swan Royal. Is that your mom's name?
Yeah.
And I said something on there. Her first name wasn't Marie.
It was Lula.
Lula. So,
and a lot of people called her Little Marie. I think they just, Lula Marie became Little Marie.
Oh, okay.
Not necessarily because she was small, but you know, she was kind of petite, but not real petite. But that's what she was called.
Okay. So I am going to, so everybody knows who we're talking about. Just give me a second. I've got some pictures of Marie, Little Marie, and I'm going to bring those up in just a second, and then we're going to talk. And I just realized, Mike, that if I do this, I can't see my questions. So I'll figure this out. Don't worry. Okay. We'll do it. First, I'll bring up the pictures, and then I'll bring up my questions on my phone.
Right.
So just a second, and we'll bring up. All right. All right. Does everybody see the picture of a very young Marie Swan at that point, right? So, yeah. Mike, you want to tell us a little bit about her at this point? Now look for my questions.
So this is back in the days of Southport High School, and in those days, which I think was around 1943, Southport High School, you graduated in the 11th grade. So she would have been graduating in the 11th grade. They had not added the extra year yet. And she was with a group of her friends known around town as the Dirty Half Dozen. Yeah. Some of her friends like Eloise and Muriel Lee and all were known around town. You know, they loved to have fun, go to the soda shop. And in those days, it was okay to hop in Prince O'Brien's car because he always left the keys in it and take it for a spin down around by the river without even asking Prince O'Brien.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He didn't care. You just go in there.
One of the stories I was told that the Dirty Half Dozen would, if you left your keys in your car, they would take it for a joyride.
Wow, that's fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, she was living on the base at Fort Caswell, right? This was 1943. World War II was going on, right?
Correct. So they had started Fort Caswell back up as a naval base, and my grandfather was back in the Navy. They brought him into the Navy, and of course by then he's in his 40s, so he's kind of late in age to be brought back into the military, but he had a lot of maritime experience that the Navy needed during World War II. So they started Fort Caswell back up and made it a base where they ran sub-hunting ships out of there. And they had taken an old tugboat and outfitted it for sub-hunting. And it was fitted in a way that it could launch depth charges if they ran into a sub. And so he did that for part of the war, but then, and so they all lived over there on Fort Caswell during the war. That's where they lived. And they would take the buses back in the bus towards Southport to go to school at Southport High School. And there's even a story of my mom's sister, Doris, the bus coming from Fort Caswell going across the causeway, ends up in the marsh. Ran off the causeway and the school bus was in the marsh. So that was another story I remember hearing, sitting around as the family would sit around at family gatherings and tell stories. But a funny story about my grandfather's naval service is, so he didn't spend his whole time there on Fort Caswell during the war. He ended up in the Pacific on a destroyer, or maybe it was a minesweeper. I'm not sure. But he sent a letter home to my grandmother, and he had used some code words because you couldn't really tell in a letter, because they were censored, you couldn't really tell your location. So he had said something in a letter, a couple of things in the letter, referring to, he was sorry to hear about the death of Reverend Marshall. Well, my grandmother's reading this stuff, and there was a few more things like that in the letter, and she knew there was no Reverend Marshall, and my grandmother got upset. She thought my grandfather had lost his mind, and she called her brother, who was Bernice Russ, over, and he said, he read the letter, and he goes, this is your husband's way of telling you that he's in the Marshall Islands. So,
Wow.
yeah, so they kind of put it in there. And there was even a reference to someone named Solomon, so that she would know he was in the Solomon Islands.
Wow, that was pretty clever.
Yeah, that was pretty clever. Of course, she didn't catch it at first, and she got upset, but she called her brother Bernice, and he knew what was up.
Wow. Okay, now you told me that your mother she'd stand at the Fort Caswell and look out at the ships sometimes and see damaged ships or something.
Yeah, so that was a part that kind of disturbed her, seeing those ships come in with the blackened sides from where they had been hit. And she even told me she had seen ships coming through that had holes in the side as big as you could drive a car through, she would say. And so that was a part that was stressful for her to remember. I remember her emotions reliving that. And another thing that they told me about, more on a happier side, is I'm not sure if it was during the war, but at some time Fort Caswell took some of those gun mounts and turned them into swimming pools, because they had these deep cement cavities where they'd had gun mounts, and they had turned those into swimming pools. And there's even been some pictures shared of those gun mounts being turned into, later on, into swimming pools.
And I will be sharing a couple of those pictures tomorrow in the presentation that I'm doing on Love and War in Southport. So thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah.
If you want to see them, you can tune in at 1 o'clock. So this is the picture that this was taken from. This is an assignment that your mom did when she was a senior, maybe 17 years old.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
I have read this, but I can't see it right now, so you might help me with it.
I love this, and actually I just really liked your mom reading this, and it says on here that she lived at the Naval Section Base. I liked her description. She says, my eyes are blue, my hair is brownish blonde. We used to call it dirty blonde, but I've noticed that authorities differ. It's cut in a longish bob. My nose is my most heartbreaking feature, one of which I cannot describe. I love the way she wrote. She liked basketball, dramatics, it seems fitting, and swimming, and she liked going on house parties at nearby beaches. Her favorite author was Tennyson. And she liked consumer economies, particularly since we started cooking. So we'll talk about that later too, her cooking. And then it says, something I do fairly well. If the accent is on fairly, I believe I can put down dancing, because when other things get tedious and boring, you can always dance your troubles away. And then under most interesting experience, I think this is what I like best. My life is so full of interesting experiences that I just couldn't begin to express one.
Yeah.
And then she said she wanted to be a nurse. So
to me, I've never seen so she mentions basketball, right? Mm-hmm. I've never seen my mom do anything athletic. That surprises me. The dramatic or the drama club type stuff, I can see that. You know,
Yeah.
my mom would fit right in good with that. And a lot of her friends and all, Waters Thompson used to come to the house, and, you know, just I can see mom loving that type of stuff. The part about being a nurse, you know, I don't see that. My mom was not good at that type of stuff. I can't see her, you know, I'm sure putting nurse down was kind of like what maybe all the high school girls were putting down at the time, maybe.
Probably. It was the war and everything. It was very patriotic to be a nurse at that point. Now, you
Right.
said at that point she was already working at the post office.
Well, you know, I thought she was, but I could be wrong about that. I know my Uncle Bernice was the postmaster at the time, and I know that my mother started very early. And I remember discussions about her still being in her teens. I know that she went to the King's Business College, so that probably took a couple of years maybe, but you know, she started real early at the post office. So it may have been a little bit later than this.
But that really became her career, was the post office, her
Yeah,
whole, and then
yeah,
eventually being
that
the
was it.
postmaster. Yeah, that's great. So this is a picture, the next picture is her engagement picture.
Yeah,
So you had told me a story about when she and your dad were dating. Do you remember
yeah.
that?
So at that time, my grandparents were living down in a house on Bay Street, at where Lord comes in. And so my father is stationed over on Oak Island as a Coast Guardsman. A lot of the young ladies in Southport met Coast Guardsmen who were stationed in the Southport Oak Island area back during all this time. There's a strong, you know, history there where, you know, they met their future husbands as Coast Guardsmen. And the same happened with my mother. She met my father, who was from Irwin, North Carolina. He had joined the Coast Guard, and he ended up stationed at Oak Island. And she met him and started dating him. And he would be he would be visiting, courting her there at the house on Bay Street that overlooked the river, and you could clearly see across to the Coast Guard station and the lighthouse and all over there. And he would leave he would leave the house to go home that evening, and he would drive all the way around and come out over on Fort Caswell area, and he would pull up on the ridge and he would flash his lights across the river to let my mother know she could see from across the river from the house. And he would flash his lights to let my mother know that he had gotten back to the base safely. And she would flash her bedroom light switch on and off to flash back. And that was the way they said goodnight. And that's kind of a cool, you know, cool story.
Very
And
romantic.
yeah, it is. But years later, talking with my mother, she said, I had an ulterior motive for that. That was my way of making sure that when Ed left the house, he went straight back to the base. He didn't go anywhere else.
She's keeping tabs on them. This is good.
Yeah,
Long before there were apps on the phone, she'd figured out a way to keep tabs on them. That's pretty good.
right.
Okay, so I think the next photo, oh, I can't find my, here we go. I think, yeah, there's her wedding photo, which I really is beautiful. I'm not going to ask you to describe her wedding gown or anything like that, but it's very lovely. And then I did the
Back
close.
then, they usually put descriptions of the gown in the announcement, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have it, but they did describe it in great detail. It's beautiful. Now, so she got married in the 50s. Is that right? Do you remember?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And then
1953, I believe.
53. And then so you were, when you were born, so she was a career woman. I admired this about her. She was a career woman. And so you were her first baby, right?
Yes.
So when you were
Yes.
born, then she took a little bit of time off and then she went back to her career, right?
Yeah. So that was the plan all along. She was going to continue with her career, and that's a little unusual for the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can think about some of my other friends, and their mothers were home, but you know, they're home, but that's a very important job. And my mother had already started her career at the post office, and she wanted to continue that career. So they had planned it. So even before I was born, they had hired a lady named Maggie Joyner, who was to take care of me and then later on take care of my sister Annelle. And she was always there with us, you know, to take care of us while both my parents had careers. And Maggie Joyner I consider her like another mother. She was the most loving person, totally nothing but love. Took good care of me and my sister, and was the person that was there for all those bumps and tumbles you get as kids, the scraped knees. She had all these remedies that she knew, the old school type remedies. I can remember I loved to play with insects as a kid. I was constantly getting stung by bumblebees and wasps and stuff. And she would break out the tobacco and make a paste out of it with some water and apply the tobacco on the bee sting. And supposedly the tobacco was supposed to pull out, you know, the venom of the sting. It was supposed seem to work, you know.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so that was one of the remedies. But Maggie stayed with us until I was 14 years old, and I left to go to military school. She was with us many, many years, many, many loving years. We loved her dearly.
Well, that's great. Now, even though she was there, sometimes your mom, even though she was working, would try to keep an eye on you too.
Yeah, because it took several people to kind of keep an eye on me. I was kind of it. Matter of fact, it took the whole town to look out for me. Okay, I was all around town, and the way Southport was, not just for me, but for everybody that grew up during that time period, the whole town looked out for the children. So no matter where you were, somebody had an eye on you. And of course, my mom working at the post office, it was like the window to the world. And back in those days, everybody came to the post office. So if you think about it, the post office, we did not have home delivery at first. And I had forgotten this. Home delivery started sometime, maybe I'm going to guess around 1965. So everybody had a post office box probably up until home delivery started. And I remember one time in a conversation on Facebook, I actually had a conversation with the family that owned the little house at 319 East Moore Street, there at the corner of Rhett and Moore Street that I grew up in. It was the Fox family. And I was having a conversation with her. And I said, so you lived in the same house? And I said, 319 East Moore Street. And she goes, well, we didn't have street numbers then. And I went, you know what? That's right. I actually remember when they gave the houses street numbers. And so because the post office was such a centralized location, you know, that people made a point of visiting at least once a day or once every 2 days, it was a very social meeting place. You know, you met all your neighbors and friends in the whole town there. And so word would get back to my mother at that window. Anything I was doing anywhere in town, she knew. So a lot of times, particularly the part when I got a little older and was swimming in the yacht basin, which in the early days of that, I was not supposed to be doing. My mother would leave during her lunch hour and make a pass with her automobile down around the yacht basin just to see if Mike was down at the yacht basin and possibly swimming in the yacht basin. And of course, all my friends were looking out for me, and they would spot her coming and they would yell, Mike, your mom's coming. And that gave me time to duck underwater or swim behind the stern of a boat.
Oh, so you wouldn't get out of the yacht basin, you would just hide until she was gone.
Yeah, she'd drive by real slow, but I got caught a lot. So, you know, good times, you know, being a
And,
kid, growing up in Southport, wanting to be down around the boats, you know.
and there was one time she caught you on a boat, right?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and this is kind of interesting too. So I when I was like 13, I got an outboard motorboat. I had a little 6-horse Johnson, little aluminum boat. My grandfather was involved in it, talked her into letting me. I don't know how that happened, but he was somehow able to talk my mother in that Mike needs a boat, and we got a little skiff, little aluminum boat with a 6-horse Johnson. But my grandfather taught me how to use it and taught me how to be safe with it and went over all the ins and outs. And I was not supposed to leave the yacht basin. I could just kind of like drive around in circles in the yacht basin and drive off the shrimp boat, me and crazy, because I'm creating a wake and your boats are bouncing up and down. And but I decided one day, me and my buddy Chuck Creech, we're gonna go to the quarantine station. So we head out and we head upriver and we go to the quarantine station. Well, to go to the quarantine station, I had to pass by our house on River Drive. Well, it just so happens that my mother's home, and she spotted me. She knew that was me out there in the boat. And she walked down from the house down to the riverbank. And here I am across the river at the quarantine station. And I could hear my mom yelling my name all the way across the river over the sound of the outboard motor. And I'm like, so, voices carry over a body of water like that. But me and Chuck, we looked at each other. We couldn't believe it. I go, can you hear my mom calling me all the way across the river? And of course, we're caught. So we take the boat and head across, and I pull up just off the bank a little bit, and she tells me, you get that boat back to the yacht basin right now. You can't use it for 2 weeks. So, yeah.
I'm going to change the picture. I just realized I haven't changed the picture in a while. There we go. That's a lovely picture. So, so you told me your mom had some things that she was sort of anxious or fearful about.
We talked about when they did the Star News article about my mom.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they quote me in there a little bit. And what I'm trying to say about that is when it came to my mother's career and other types of positions she may have held, like maybe a position in the Methodist Church, my mother was very strong and confident when it came to stuff like that. But when it came to the home life and to me and my sister, she was very anxious, very concerned all the time, fearful that something was going to happen to us. And so there was this two sides type thing with my mother. I never explained it very well in that Star News article because it's kind of hard to find the words. But when it came to her career and those types of positions, a very strong, confident woman. But when it came to being concerned about things that could befall her children, she was very, very fearful and anxious. And I can tell you a funny story about that. So sometime in the mid 60s, maybe around 1965, this is before we had air conditioning, so all the windows are open, the back doors, screen doors. The door's not closed, but the screen door is. And all of a sudden we hear this very loud noise, a big rumble. And my mother, she goes, oh my goodness, it's that hot water heater, it's exploding. Get out of here. And we all break and run. Okay. My father, my sister, me, we all run because mom thinks it's the hot water heater, the gas hot water heater blowing up. Apparently sometime there'd been some articles in the early 60s about gas hot water heaters blowing up in houses. She thought that's what it was. Well, I ran out the back door towards where the noise was coming from because that's where my dog was. I was going to go save my dog. My father ran out there with me, but Mom and Aunt Nell ran out to the front, out towards Moore Street. And soon as I rounded the corner of the garage, I saw that it was our neighbor, Skeeter Trot. He had an outboard motor in a 55-gallon metal drum, and he had fired it up just to keep it running, just to make sure it, stayed in running condition. He would fire it up every now and then. And I sort of knew that that's what the noise was, because I had heard him do it so many times. But my mother, the anxiousness of my mother had scared us so bad. But anyway, so we figure out what it is, and we come back in and we sit back down to dinner, and we sort of had forgotten about Annelle. So it's me and my mom and my dad were sitting there, and I don't know why we'd forgotten about Annelle, but a few minutes later we hear, "Mama, Mama." Annelle's on the front porch, hollering in the screen window, "Is it okay to come back in now?" So she'd run all the way down to the river to get
Oh
away.
my goodness.
Yeah.
So she was also afraid of driving, right? Your mom, well, I
Yeah.
guess she drove inside Southport because she drove around looking for you.
Yep. She would drive inside the city limits of Southport, but not outside the city limits of Southport. That is until the post office. So the post office years later transferred her to Norman, Oklahoma. And then they transferred her to Houston, Texas, Wallace, North Carolina, Burgaw, North Carolina, Carolina Beach, before she ever got back to Southport.
Wow.
They had done away with a particular position, a supervisory position. And it wasn't just my mother. There was a whole group of postal employees, and my mother was not going to quit and was not going to retire early. So when it came to dealing with Houston, she drove. She drove. When she had to do it, she did it.
Well, and like you said, when it came to her career, she was willing to do stuff. And I know I read an article, I think I mentioned this too, about her back in the 70s, I guess, when they had built the nuclear power plant. They decided to do a dry run. I don't know, Catherine, I don't know if anybody else remembers this. They were going to do this dry run of an evacuation. Like, if we had a nuclear disaster, would everybody be able to evacuate? And it was very controversial. Some people said they were going to join in and do this pretend evacuation. Other people said it was, they weren't. But and your mother was like, "No, I have to work. I'm the postmaster. I can't take the day off for that." And here she's so fearful of everything. You'd think she'd want to be fully prepared for a nuclear disaster if the plant went up, but she was such a to her job. So
yeah, she was prepared to stay there and be postmaster.
Yeah. Okay, let's change a picture. Oh, I wish I'd changed something before. It's so pretty. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. I love that picture of my mom. That's a great picture.
It is. It's wonderful.
She looks so happy,
She looks like a movie star. Okay, and so now this is when she retired, or is this later in her career?
I think it could be associated with about the time she retired.
So then she took up some hobbies.
Yep.
Did some things. What did she do then, now that she wasn't having to keep you safe?
So in all the years growing up, I never knew my mother could cook. She retires, and the next thing you know, she's reading a few cookbooks. But the type of talent she had for cooking could not have just come from reading a few cookbooks. She had a knack for it. I guess my grandmother, who was a wonderful cook, before mom started her career, had taught mom how to cook. Because when mom started cooking, wonderful, wonderful dishes. And my mother would collect cookbooks, and she loved the Southern style cooking. And she would collect cookbooks, and I could go visit my mother, and she would be sitting on the couch. You'd think reading a novel. Nope, she's reading a cookbook. I'm like, how can you, I just like to see all the different recipes and how they're put together, She'd like to read through cookbooks.
And she did traveling too, right?
Yeah. So, and I think Catherine and her mother joined Annelle and my mom on one trip. But there was this time period, and maybe they still do it, I don't know, but there was this time period back in the 80s, I believe, where there were a lot of tour companies running bus tours. And you could go around to different cities in the United States and be on some type of bus tour. And you would meet a lot of other people that had similar interests. And she met a lot of wonderful people and had a lot of good friends that she met just on these bus tours going around to different places, like historical places or, touristy type places. So she did that quite a bit. And I think my sister went with her quite a few times. I never did. For some reason, I wasn't into bus tours. After spending 7 hours on a bus going back and forth to Portsmouth, Virginia all those years.
You'd had your fill of buses, huh?
Yeah.
And she kind of had a second career as a volunteer, right?
Yep, she did. She volunteered at Dozier Hospital, J. Arthur Dozier Memorial Hospital. She wore a pink smock type outfit, and she loved every minute of it. Because my mother was always such a people person. That's why at the post office, she loved the post office, particularly when she worked the window, because she got to greet all the people and meet all the people. And I think one of the articles talked about she avoided getting promotions at the post office in those early years because it would pull her away from the window. She didn't want to do that. The same thing with Dozier Hospital, acting on the front desk as a volunteer, greeting all the people that came in. She loved it, and she did that for years. And she treated her volunteer work like it was a job. She was always on time. She never missed a day. I think I read in the article that she had over 2,000 hours of service at Dozier as a volunteer. And I remember taking my sister and I took my mom to a special recognition dinner that Dozier Hospital put on for her to recognize her for her service, as a volunteer.
That's wonderful. So then she became a grandma eventually, right? So what was she like as a grandma? Was she still as anxious and, sort of with your children as she was with you?
Yeah, she was. When it came to being concerned about things happening and all, she was still anxious that way. But she was our go-to person. Our kids were in daycare down at this little place called Robin's Nest. And if they got sick, and then my grandchildren called her Gemma, Jam and Grandma, Gemma. And we would call Gemma, and Gemma would be over there in her car to pick those kids up. And she would take them back to her place. And the first thing she would ask them is, "You want a bologna sandwich?"
A cure-all.
Even some of my buddies tell me that my mother, if they came up looking for me, my mother would invite them in and offer them a bologna sandwich.
Oh, so was it a regular bologna sandwich or was it a fried bologna sandwich? Because I grew up on fried bologna sandwiches.
Well, we did do the fried bologna, but these were probably regular bologna.
Regular, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, like I said, whenever you talked about your childhood, I always thought about your mother having to go through all that, and I really enjoyed learning more about her. Now, I do feel a little bit better after you explained about her own adolescence and her joyriding in the car.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that you kind of, the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. I think you got a little of your mischievousness from.
That's a good point. I think you're right. But one of the things I want to add to the anxiousness side, if we can go back to that, is my mother would take me and my sister to the beach. Mm-hmm. Well, ankle deep was as far as we could go into the water. And she also would make us get underneath the pier out of the sun. So, my mother would do stuff like that as well.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like she certainly you turned out very well, so she certainly did a good job. So my last question is, when you think back on your own childhood in Southport, what do you wish that your own children or grandchildren now could have experienced that you experienced growing up?
Yeah, so I really wish they could have experienced that time period. There was everybody knew everybody, and there was such a quaintness to Southport, and things weren't as busy. You know, I just wish they could have experienced that. You could walk, you know, the town was your playground. You know, everybody looked out for each other. You know, yeah, it's not like that today. Kids use a lot of technology. They don't get out of the house much, and you know, you live in cities, you know, where you can't really get out and about and be down at the river, or you know, be down at the ball field. Of course, I guess kids do go to the ball fields, but we were all around town on our bicycles or walking, you know. So I think you know, that's a type of childhood that I wish every kid, you know, could have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing your childhood with us. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay.
Here we go. And see if anybody has any questions for you.
Okay.
Anybody here? I don't know, Bob, if there's anybody on Facebook, if anybody has anything.
No, we don't have anybody on Facebook at this point. But Liz, I have a question for you. And that is the question, how much are you like Mike's mom?
Oh. I don't think I was a real anxious. I don't think I was a real anxious mom. I grew up with brothers. I grew up not as a wonderful existence as what Mike did, but you know, times were different back then, and I kind of expected childhood to have some bumps and bruises, and I just always figured everything would work out okay, and it did. So.
And you never checked up on them, I'm sure.
Well, sure, I kept tabs. So,
Well, I
Catherine, you want to weigh in on that?
I'm sorry, what'd you say, Mike?
I was going to say I wanted to thank everybody for joining us. You know, it's really nice to remember, you know, my mother and all the things that she did for us, you know, and having the chance to grow up in Southport, and, you know, that time period, my grandfather being involved in the maritime industries and stuff, so much touched a part of my life. That's why I was drawn to the yacht basin so much as a child. You know, it's just good memories. So thanks everybody for joining and listening.
Mike, there's one story. You know how your mother caught you in the river in the boat?
Yeah.
Well, you had graduated. I was a senior, and I picked Annelle up. She was in my carpool. It was her and Kelly Johnson and Cindy Harrington and maybe Teresa Cumbie. And we went to pick Annelle up, and she decided to skip school that day. So we were coming from your house going down Moore Street. We got in front of the post office, and John Richards backed into my car right in front of the post office. And who saw it but your mother? And she comes out, "Where's Annelle?" And I'm like, "We haven't picked her up yet." So she was a Hawkeye. She knew what was going on.
Yep. That's for sure. I mean, you know, and so there you think you're going to get away with something, and then something like that happens, and you know, mom's right there on the spot.
She took care of my mother on that Bermuda cruise because she stayed seasick the whole time. And if it hadn't been for Marie, I couldn't have made it through the cruise.
So I knew you guys went on a trip together, but it was a Bermuda cruise is what it was?
It was your mom and some of the royal family. And I was with my mother and Jane Wiggs and some other people. And we didn't all know that we were on the same cruise until we got there. But my mother stayed so sick, she'd have to go to the infirmary, and Marie would take her because I was busy having a good time.
Right.
I'd leave her in the lounge chair, and Marie would come by and take her to the infirmary for me. So,
yeah. So, you talked about, she mentioned in consumer economics, if you mention consumer economics, to me, when I first saw that listed for her high school, I immediately thought something related, to consumer economics today, like trade, commerce, business. But she was talking about home ec, which used to be a part of the school, and they taught cooking and whatever went on in the home, right, Catherine?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were talking about home economics. And they had classes where they would teach cooking, washing, I guess cleaning. I don't know.
That was always my worst subject.
Catherine, did you ever take home ec, or was it already?
I did. I had Lizzie Mitchell and I had Mrs. Hogue. And I had the pattern to make a tennis dress because I was all into tennis.
Yeah.
And I just never could learn to sew. It's probably still in my mother's sewing basket right now.
So tell me about home ec. What types of classes were being taught?
Well, they taught us how to cook. I mean, just basics. And they taught, Libby, I think she's on here. She had home ec with Mrs. Shue, Janet Shue, I believe.
Yeah.
So we all learned to cook and sew, except me. But they had all kinds of housekeeping things to learn.
Right. That's interesting. And they don't teach that anymore at all, do they?
Mm-mm.
Really? They don't?
That in shorthand.
Right.
Shorthanded.
And, pretty soon maybe they won't be teaching cursive either.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. I really enjoyed learning more about your mom and about your childhood growing up. It's always interesting.
Just remember, I had nothing to do with all the gray hair she developed. She was a wonderful lady.
Mike, I want to thank you for months now of stories about growing up in Southport, and I think the beauty of the whole thing. From my perspective, not growing up in Southport, but growing up, in Kingston, Pennsylvania, is the stories that you tell are, we can relate to, and we can come back with our version of that story. And I think that bit of nostalgia is really wonderful, and it all kind of makes us feel good. We appreciate, and it makes us appreciate what you're doing with these programs. Now, that being said, I want to tell everyone that we're going to take a break and for June, July, and August, and be working to put in place more stories that we can tell. And
we'll pick back up with the Storyteller series in September.
Yeah. See you in September. That could be a great song title, couldn't it?
Yeah, or a movie title.
Yeah, could be. All right.
Yeah.
Hey, so Michael, and thanks everyone who's plugged into us tonight, and it's great. I had a great time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Good night.